Everyone, I'd like to welcome you to this multi-location meeting of the Pensions Committee, which is open to the press and the public on request. This meeting is not being broadcast live. However, a recording will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. Excuse me. Please be aware that this meeting is being transcribed only for the purpose of producing the minutes. This transcript will be deleted once the committee approves the minutes. The transcript will not be downloaded by anyone other than Democratic Services. As always, we welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. Equally as always, I've had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members that, as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure of 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you both please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting? Please can members attending via Microsoft Teams refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. So, moving on to the agenda, item number 1, attendance and apologies. Jade.
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Keat this morning.
Thank you very much. Just for information for everyone else, Councillor Tew has declined the meeting request but hasn't sent apologies with that. And I think we're going to be quite strict that unless we actually get apologies sent in, just declining an invite doesn't do it. So actually, I might contact Chris and just to remind him in future to send apologies through, as well as declining the invite. Agenda item number 2, declarations of interest. Also back to Jade.
Thanks, Chair. So starting with Councillor Haller, please. I have a personal interest that you're a contributor to the fund.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And Councillor Williams, I have a personal interest as yourself and your wife are both in receipt of a pension and contributor to the fund.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. And then, Chair, I have a personal interest as your father and 2 other family members are in receipt of a pension and you're a contributor to the fund.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before moving on to item number 3, I just want to set out how Alex and I thought we might run the meeting today. So as you can see, there's a section. So item number 3 is a public matter, and then we move on. Item number 5 rather, will be excluding the press and public to move on to item number 6, which is the main meat of the agenda, looking at the various agreements that we need to approve today and send on to full council on the 3rd of March. So I think what we're going to do, if for item number 3, you'll have seen that there are the parts of the papers for item number 3 and item number 6 are substantively the same, in as much as the notes provided by Hymans Robertson for both agenda items, there are similarities. I think if I can ask John and David that if we just keep our comments and questions specifically to the issue of the inter-authority agreement on item number 3, that we'll put everything else into item number 6 instead of repeating ourselves unnecessarily, if you're both happy to do that. I think what we're going to do is that for both of those items, though, Alex will refer to the Hymans notes in the respective appendices for items number 3 and number 6 to act as a spine to talk us through exactly what we're being asked to sign off, instead of going automatically through those agreements clause by clause. Obviously, if there's anything specifically any of us wish to raise in the clauses of both the client and the shareholder agreement, we're more than happy to do that. But that might take a phenomenal amount of time. So what we'll do is we'll go through the précis, ask questions, and then make specific references to the clauses if we have them, if you're both happy with that way forward. Yeah, I can see you both nodding. In which case then, agenda item number 3. This is the Wales Pension Partnership revised inter-authority agreement, and I'll pass over to Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me online as well. Yeah, great. So, as the Chair's just introduced, I'm going to cover the two items this morning. I'm very mindful that there is a lot of information to digest here, with some material recommendations in terms of the documents that we're proposing. So, I'm going to try to walk through that at a level of detail that I think is appropriate to give the context, but by all means, please stop me and ask questions as you see fit. I think just before we get into the detail, I just want to make a couple of general comments, and I might reiterate this at the start of the next item. But as you're aware, the government have mandated a number of changes to the way that pooling is undertaken in the UK, and particularly how that affects Wales, is that a new regulated investment company has been, or is in the process of being established in response to that government consultation. The company, as you're all aware by now, will have responsibility effectively for implementation of the strategies of the respective constituent authorities. And what that means is, whilst Pension Committee retains the decision function over setting its investment strategy, its objective, its beliefs, the implementation of that is effectively being delegated to a new regulated investment company named the Wales Pension Partnership Investment Management Company. We've had various briefings throughout the last sort of 12, 18 months on this particular subject. We're now moving much closer to the 1st of April go-live date for the new company, which is in line with the forthcoming regulations. And so today we are presenting the key governance documents excuse me, for your consideration and approval. On the basis that these are approved, that enables us to move to the next stage, which is effectively to conclude the FCA authorisation process, the onboarding of the staff and the structure that needs to be in place, and ultimately the company being able to operate from April in line with government expectations. So that's a bit of a run-through on the background. This particular exercise, in terms of evolving, in some cases evolving the governance, but creating new standalone documents, is something that's been going on since just before Christmas. We've had several briefings and engagement sessions, both as a fund, where Rob Lamb, the CEO, was invited along to present to you in the early stages. There have also been much more detailed, granular briefings of the elected members and the senior officers within each of the pension fund authorities, involving also the pension board chairs, the monitoring officers of the councils, in order to get to the position we're in today. So this is a sort of a 2-month exercise, if you like, which I think has been really positive in terms of bringing people together and having lots of positive discussion around the development. In respect of item 3, the recommendations are set out on page 3 of the pack. We're asking you to note the report and the respective appendices, and I'll touch on those in a second. Asking you to approve the revised inter-authority agreement, but I think the key distinction here is that the inter-authority agreement, which has been around since the inception of pooling and the Wales Pension Partnership, that is a document that is reserved to the County Council, to Torfaen County Borough Council, for ultimate approval. So, effectively, what we're asking of this committee today is to be satisfied with the amendments that are proposed and to endorse it for Council, who will consider this on the 3rd of March, subject to your endorsement. That's the cover on the recommendations. As the Chair mentioned, the inter-authority agreement is in the public domain. It has been since it was created back in 2016. There have been some alterations and some amendments to that document in the last 10 years, as you'd expect. They've come via this committee and ultimately through the Council for any approved changes. So we're following the precedent that is in place. We'll talk more about the remaining 2 documents in the next item, but ultimately there is much more of a commercial proposition within those, hence they are reserved to the exempt part of the agenda. As the Chair said, moving into the documents, I'll focus primarily on what I think is a relatively succinct note from Hymans Robertson, which is starting on page 7 of your pack. Just as a reminder, Hymans Robertson are our oversight and governance advisor to the LGPS pool, to the Wales Pension Partnership. They have been since inception, hence they have a lot of the muscle memory, and they do understand Wales, but also the wider LGPS regulations and the direction of travel. Hymans have been involved throughout this exercise over the last 12 or 18 months and have had a role in both partaking in the engagement sessions that I referred to, both on a Wales basis and individual authorities, has also been engaged heavily with the legal advisors, Burgess Salmon, who have held the pen on drafting these documents. So they're well placed to give a perspective and ultimately their assurance over this exercise as our oversight advisor. So we talked about the inter-authority agreement. It's a document that isn't new, that has been in place for 10 years. It sets out the relationship today between the 8 pension fund authorities in Wales, and it basically governs how they will interact. And within that, in a nutshell, that summarises the role of the Joint Governance Committee, which is the elected representation, a chair of each of the 8 committees. It also has officer working group representation, which are the Section 151 officers and senior officers from each of the pension funds. And ordinarily, those forums meet quarterly, but as you're aware, there's been a lot more frequent meeting of those parties over the last 12 months as we work through this project. At the bottom of page 7, and I'll refer to this in the second item, there is an overview or a schematic of the new proposed governance structure for the partnership. What we're focusing on here are the items within the blue box and the subsequent in the dark blue on the right-hand side, less so on the new company structure, which is highlighted in the red boxes on the left-hand side. So I think the first thing to note is the JGC, the Joint Governance Committee Officer Working Group forums, will remain. That's integral to the way in which we see this governance model working moving forward, and is defined in the inter-authority agreement. And as you can see on the furthest to the right-hand side, you've got the input and interaction of the Pension Committee and the local pension board into those forums, both politically and at officer level, so from an operational standpoint. The new body that is being introduced is the shareholder board. That is the formal body that will interact directly with the company board, and we'll talk a little bit about further in the agenda about things such as the reserve matters, where the company will have a certain level of discretion to make decisions, and that is part of the documents that we're asking you to approve today, but ultimate responsibility and ultimate decision-making does fall back to the shareholders, which are ultimately the 8 pension fund authorities. I think just moving through to the next page, and there's a lot of detail here, so I'm just pulling out really the pertinent points, but currently the Officer Working Group is there to represent the authorities, as you'd imagine, and as there is no effective shareholder model, we're working on that as a joint venture, effectively. The key change with the revised drafting of the inter-authority agreement is that the Officer Working Group will become the client-side body that will focus on ensuring that the new company is providing the service and the delivery of the objectives in line with what is being agreed, both in terms of what the government are asking for, but also as authorities, what we expect as clients and as shareholders. So Officer Working Group role focuses more on client-side matters, and that's a kind of slight alteration, if you like, in terms of the role that we play today. Today, we generally focus on overseeing the third-party providers that we contract with, such as Waystone, Russell, etc. We will move that focus to the company as almost the one-stop shop that will be responsible for managing all of those subsequent relationships. So that's not too much of a deviation from the current role. The Joint Governance Committee will effectively provide kind of a dual role in that capacity. So they will also focus on client-side responsibility, and in that, you're thinking about things like key policies, making sure that there is elected representation and that there's representation of the authorities in terms of what the company delivers on behalf of the clients. And the JGC will still, as it does today, have the power to appoint its own advisors that will be able to hold the company to account. Now, I think it's to be determined what that needs to look like. It's obviously early days. The company is going to have resources to provide more support to the JGC and to the OWG and ultimately to the authorities as clients, but there is the power there to provide additional external support where it is necessary. The Joint Governance Committee also have a fundamental role in, as do the Pension Committee actually, in addressing and responding to reserved matters. So I talked about that in terms of the inter-authority agreement being reserved to Council, but ultimately there will be decisions that the company will require from its shareholders that will require a formal vote, if you like. And there's some examples of that: company budget, so the annual budget, annual business plan, etc. There will also be, within the inter-authority agreement, which is the context we're talking about, a client-side budget and a client-side business plan, so how the clients and the pension committees collectively oversee the new company. Those are reserved matters. They require JGC approval. They will also require pension committee approval as well. There's a table at the bottom of page 8, which is lots of detail and not particularly easy to read, but I think what it's trying to highlight here is, within the context of the existing arrangements, we've got the OWG, we've talked a lot about that, a client-side focus, that's the officer-led representation. We've got the JGC that has a dual role as client and a shareholder in overseeing company, appointing its own advisors where it needs to. It has the political input that is required, but also it has ultimate backstop authority on reserved matters, which are decisions the company require. The two new forums sit on either end of this table, being the company board, which is largely driven by the regulations and the regulatory nature of an investment management company. So the FCA prescribed quite a bit of the governance framework around how that should act. And then the shareholder forum, or the shareholder board, which again is a newly formed entity that effectively will oversee the company. So that's the formal facing body that will face off against the company board, but it will be advised and informed by OWG and JGC, largely where those forums operate today. There's a big section of this document through page 9 that really just talks about a little bit more about what I've just described in terms of the evolution of roles and responsibilities. There are aspects of this that are largely unchanged, which I hope is reassuring, but what we have tried to do, and the main objective of the inter-authority agreement, is to accommodate the necessary changes that will sit elsewhere in the other documents we'll talk about later in the agenda. Bottom of page 9 does summarise, a little bit as I've just described, some of the changes to the governance which have prompted some change to the drafting of the inter-authority agreement. But that small graphic at the bottom of page 9 you can see shows the kind of interaction between company and the collective WPP authorities, and then individual authorities as a collective across the inter-authority agreement, which is, as we're talking about, being amended or proposed for amendment. The inter-authority agreement, as I say, is largely an evolution. It is removing some responsibility, which I should just highlight. So currently today, the inter-authority agreement gives power to the authorities to collectively hire and fire the operator, so that's Waystone. Waystone provide all of the regulatory compliance today to enable the legal structure around the investment funds. As you can imagine, that fits much more as a company responsibility going forward. The company will be overseeing all of the investments, implementation and advising on strategy, etc. So it makes more sense for that to be a relationship that the company has directly. The inter-authority agreement has, as I've already talked about, introducing some new responsibilities, which is around overseeing company delivery, shareholder reserve matters, and recommendations that come to that shareholder board to consider those matters. As a result, and as you might expect, there are some changes and revisions to the terms of reference proposed for both the JGC and OWG to accommodate those new responsibilities, and also introducing a terms of reference for the newly created shareholder forum or shareholder board. The remainder of the document, moving into page 10, really highlights all of this in more detail. The bottom half of page 10 details the schedule, so there's again more granularity around some of the specifics, so terms of reference, for example, some of the detailed reserve matters that will fall to shareholders to consider. I don't propose to go through all of those today, and in fact there are some, you might notice if you've reviewed Appendix 3, which is the full form legal document, you will notice that there are still some omissions from that which will be populated ahead of the Council effectively executing on these documents. So we're a little bit away from that today in terms of asking for your approval, but that will be populated and a version recirculated prior to execution. I think the final point I would make, and this is on page 11, so just kind of summarising the work that has gone into the inter-authority agreement, is that we've introduced a new review framework for this document. So I mentioned that the inter-authority agreement has been in place for about 10 years now. There have been, to my recollection, at least 2 occasions where we've revisited that and made changes and therefore sought approval on those changes. But it has been, I think, fair to say, a fairly static document. I think given that the expedient nature in which we have tried to revise these documents and create the 2 new standalone documents, I think everybody has collectively agreed that a formal review point in 12 to 18 months is sensible. That is effectively to assess and test at the time whether these documents are working for all parties as intended, and obviously a clear commitment at that point to make further revisions as necessary. I should just add, in the case of all of the documents, there is legal provision for one party or another to trigger reviews of these documents at any time. That would require, obviously, partnership and working together. So there is flexibility inside that 12 to 18-month window, should it be necessary. But I think the headline here is to note that these documents don't have to be set in stone and must work for all parties. Final thing I'd say before I pause is the role of the Joint Committee and the Officer Working Group will continue, slightly revised responsibilities, more pointed towards overseeing the new company, both its clients and shareholders. So in some ways simplifying that role, because there'll be less parties to oversee, but it will be quite a complex operation, and we'll need our advisors, Aoife and Betty are on the line today, who will be able to guide us through that and ensure that we understand what good looks like and how to hold the company to account. But crucially, JGC OWG will be that continuity. The pension committees remain responsible for setting investment strategy, and it's a strategic allocation objectives. They're still responsible for the fiduciary outcomes of decisions made, and whether that's the implementation of the company, still fiduciary responsible to the members. And as I mentioned, there will be some key decisions that the new company will require from its shareholders. And whilst the shareholder board is there formally to exercise that function, the shareholder board will take its direction through a combination of officers, joint committee members, and ultimately pension committees who will be asked to approve those reserved matters. So I think still gives significant degree of control to the authority, but this redrafting has been necessary to accommodate, as I said at the start, the significance of the change that is ahead of us. I will pause there for any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Now, before taking questions, I mean, I'd be quite interested if Betty or Ethan or Ian has any reflections on the agreement as presented to us. Then I'll come back to David, who I know put his hand up. It's just David, I thought best to get all the technical advice and reflections in first before we ask our questions. So I don't know, Ian, Betty, Ethan, do any of you have anything you'd like to add? Betty.
Hi, I think I'd just like to give comments about all of the documents in the second part of the meeting.
Excellent, thank you very much. So Ian or Ethan, any thoughts? Ian is on mute. Can you have to put your microphone on? There we go.
So, okay. Yeah, no comments at this stage, Chair. Thank you.
Ethan.
And I will build on at the second part as well.
Excellent. In which David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this is largely uncontentious because essentially it is, as you say, a revision to reflect the state of play as it is now. I'm pleased to see that there's going to be the review in 12 to 18 months' time. My personal opinion would be that probably this particular arrangement may slightly wither on the vine if there's confidence in the arrangements being constructed alongside it. But I think it gives assurance to the authorities that they can come together independently of, and I guess that's my question, which I'll formulate in a moment, outside of the IMCO to be able to give a joint opinion. So my question was then, does the IMCO have any say in the IAA? I don't think they do, but I'd like to get confirmation. Or do they just receive it and be aware of it as a body, if you like, in the new process?
Betty, despite sort of saying that you wouldn't say anything, you've now got your hand up. So if your comment is specifically,
I do, and it was following on David's comment, and just this is a generic comment. The idea of having a review 12 or 18 months. First of all, I think that's excellent. I had actually strongly urged Alex to take that on board. I think you hit the nail on the head, David. This is intended to kind of keep all the parties aligned, because it is kind of leverage that, basically the pension funds will have to change things if things are not going the way they want it. So hopefully this will motivate everybody to make these reviews kind of not needed in an ideal world. But this is very typical in the commercial world, like in joint ventures and things like that. You never have something just set in stone day one and going on for eternity.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex, do you want to reply to that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Williams. So I think just to directly address that, the company hasn't had a say in the inter-authority agreement. And I think that's as you'd expect. And to your point, the intention here is to build on what has been a successful partnership for the last 10 years in terms of the collaborative way in which what will now become the shareholders and clients work together. And I think whilst the legal provisions in all of these documents mean that Torfaen or the Greater Gwent Fund has its own voice and can vote in its own way, there is merit in having the mechanism to do so in a collaborative manner and to work collectively with its authority, with its partners. And I think that's what we wanted to try to preserve in these arrangements. So yes, hopefully that addresses it. The company has no say in the drafting of the IAA. There's a small caveat that things like the shareholder board and some of the shareholder forum creeps into some of the other documents, so there is an element of that has had company consideration, but the IAA fundamentally is a shareholder and client document.
Okay, thank you, Alex. John, anything specifically from you? John H, that is. No? I'm happy to take comments from board members as well, if anybody has any. No? Okay. In which case, I mean, just from my perspective, and I will pick up on this in the private section. It's just important. We are, I think, rightly using the Hymans-Robertson appendices as the spine for this meeting, because they are very good and very detailed. It's just to say that at some points this is advice. Some of the information in those appendices are advice to us on what to do, that we are not necessarily voting on the advice that Hymans has suggested. I mean, I will pick up later. I've got some, and I've raised this with officers, so I'm not trying to bounce anybody into anything, excuse me. I've got some issues with some of the advice provided by Hymans about representation across some of the new bodies that I'll go into later. But looking at the summary of key changes on page 5, it's just to say, I think it's very important that this body has the inter-authority agreement sort of sets out the mechanisms to approve the WPP business plan. I think a bit like David, if I've interpreted you correctly, David, if the relationship, obviously the relationships that each authority will have with the IMCO are bilateral relationships, so we don't necessarily, that relationship does not impinge upon the WPP. If the relationships work correctly over the next 12 months, you are right. I think we do need to have a conversation about what is the continuing role of the host authority in the residual non-IMCO bit of the WPP, because the relationships and the legally binding agreements are with the authorities, not with that body. And so definitely when it comes to the approval of that business plan, I will be asking questions about what exactly is going to be in the lines of that business plan. I think one thing I would be sceptical of would be if the host authority just continues to do what the WPP has done, i.e. rent all the advice in, because that strikes me we're going through the back door against the grain of what the Fit for the Future consultation has led us to. We're either actually setting this up as a professional organisation with our own advice. I don't necessarily see that the host authority then should be buying in separate advice to scrutinise the advice we're paying for. It seems a bit redundant to me. Also, as Betty and David point out, I strongly agree with the review after 12 to 18 months, and I think it should be 12 months. I don't want us to get into a foot dragging over this. We need to make sure that everything is fit for purpose as soon as possible. That was it, I think. Right, so, made my points. If people are happy, I'll refer members to the recommendations, which are paragraph 8 on page 6. So the recommendations at 8.1, it's recommended that the Pension Committee, 1, note the contents of this report and the respective appendices, 2, approve the revised inter-authority agreement, and 3, endorse the revised inter-authority agreement to Torfaen County Borough Council for final approval, where we'll be taking this to the full council on the 3rd of March. So, David, John, are you happy to endorse those 3 points? Excellent. So that's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on then, item number 4 on page something silly. So you have to get through 69. Not there yet. No. Talk amongst yourselves. Right, agenda. Okay. So agenda item 4 is the date of the next meeting. That is the 30th of March 2026. That is for noting only. Although I will also note that will be Alex's last meeting. Won't it, Alex, as head of pensions? So I expect everybody to turn up to tell him how much they're going to miss him. Then agenda item number 5 is the exclusion of the press and public. So to agree the exclusion of the press and public from the meeting as presentations and meeting papers are not for publication, because in accordance with paragraphs 14 of Part 4 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Access to Information Variation Order Wales 2007, it contains information about a particular individual and information relating to the financial and business affairs of particular persons, including the Council, and in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemptions outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. John, David, are you happy to kick the press and public out? Excellent. Carried.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll wait for Jade to confirm.